Just as that comes up, we are live on our Facebook page. Welcome to the Retribe Facebook page, folks. I'm Nick. Joining us is Melissa and Michelle. And today we're going to be talking about compassion in the workplace. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about compassion and as it relates to self, compassion as it relates to others, compassion as it relates to personal relationships. And we found that over, since people have been going back into the workplace, a lot of the reports that we've had back is there's been a lot of conflict in the workplace. And I think we've even had some conflict around us and some of the sessions that we've had, guys, over the last few weeks. So let's talk a little bit about conflict, and then let's talk about how we can start practicing compassion in the workplace again through these uncertain times. I know I have some examples of when I've had conflict in my workplace. Pre-Retribe times when things weren't so compassionate and tender in my life, very self and ego driven. And I'm just wondering, maybe Mel, do you have any times where you're like, there's been a lot of conflict in my workplace?
So it's kind of like a two-folded, or I could answer this in a couple of different ways. Number one is when somebody is working in the role that I've been working in, which is like frontline work. The conflict I've often seen was more about like systems in place that have treated humans like not humans, and kind of like taking a very box ticking approach to a very complex and complicated and person in pain. So that's where the conflict is, where, I would go to a facility that was meant to be like the best in the city for mental health and addiction, and the person or the doctor, whoever would talk to me instead of the person beside me who I was supporting, and just stuff like that. Maybe it's not conflict, but it is actually quite harmful. So like that's one little example of treating humans like nothing, essentially.
So I suppose let's get into that. It made you feel angry, the way that people were operating in that system. Was that an emotion that was present for you then? Were you angry?
Nick, do you know me? Is this the first time?
Come on, I want to get this fiery Mel. Come on.
Yeah, I just did a meditation, so you might not tap into that anger very easily today. But yes, I've been angry a lot. And I know for me, a lot of when my anger comes up now is because there's injustice present. And that could be like just injustice on whatever level I feel is unjust. So yeah, the anger is definitely there and so if we're going to talk about conflict, in a different kind of way, it can be about we're not being understood, or we're being misunderstood, or we're not feeling listened to or heard. That's the same scene, right? So like that for me is a real cause at the base of any conflict, like internally and externally. Is like, are you not seeing the whole of the person in front of you, whether that's me or somebody I'm supporting or just a stranger in general? That's always the bottom root of, for me, conflict. And then that's where my anger is like, oh girl, I'm going to take you through this so we could fight this, which has not been useful a lot, but it has been at the same time when it's done out of like a way to transform and not just create more pain.
Just as usual, I want to just remind anybody who watches, if you have any questions with regards to compassion in the workplace, you want to kind of put to us, then please feel free to put it in the chat. Also, we are going to leave you with a few little tips around compassion in the workplace too at the end. So Michelle, how about you? Like, have you had any conflict in your workplace over the years?
Loads. I think for me, when we've spoken about compassion in relationships, I think when it goes into a work environment, because when we think of compassion, we think of one-on-one, and in a work environment, you've got so many different factors at play, so many different elements at play, and compassion executes as more of a behavior for me within the workplace rather than a space. It's a behavior within the space. I think that's where that's the difference for me between one-on-one relationships and the work relationships. And there's one of the, I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with this. One of the big ones is you've got a manager who says, I know everybody's tired. I know everybody's burnt out. I know this person's just been through this horrible time. You know, we've all had some problems at home. You know, people have had this, listing all these really traumatic experiences or things that would throw people off, but we've still got a target to hit. And I think, yes, businesses do need to make money. They need to have structure. They need to have, and that can be helpful for people to have something that's familiar and to have a routine and to embed that in. But when you drip feed that kind of behavior to people, every meeting, every hour, every interaction, every day, every week, every month, every year that somebody's within that workplace, it starts to become compressed and very, very heavy. And I think that's why no compassion is so destructive within a work environment, because people are, and you know, those managers go from fear. It's the fear of losing money, losing profit, the fear of not pleasing their manager. And that's, for me, is a huge issue that needs to be solved, or at least addressed in a workplace.
It's interesting because sorry.
No, I was going to say, from both of you, it's about when people put other things ahead of our humanness. So if it's systems or if it's targets, we're putting that ahead of our own self, our care. And I think that's when obviously conflict comes into place, or at least a misunderstanding around, you know, people's intentions. Now, sorry, you were going to say something.
No, it was on the same thread of like what the core of it is when somebody's experience is not validated. I think that's what it all comes down to, and that's where compassion can be invited in, or it can be chosen not to include, and like, well, that's the name of the game. And I know, Nick, you can speak a lot to that on all areas of your life, but that's the idea. I think it's the core for all of us. It's when a person's experience is not validated, and worse, maybe, is when the self, the person feeling invalidated, takes somebody else's experience of them as their truth. That is, for me, is like banana making. Because I'm sorry.
Banana making. Banana bread. I want banana bread.
It's like 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in my life. So I think that's the thing too, is like, then when the person who is feeling the pain or the suffering is seeing somebody's experience of like, just toughen up, or your trauma is not the biggest trauma in the world, and then we internalize somebody's experience as our own truth. That is like, I think, the essence of conflict, which leads to disconnection, which leads to pain needing to be met in different ways, right?
Yeah, I think when when I look at where I've had the worst conflict in my workplace is when, you know, my name was on the lease for an office space, and I had rented out office space to other companies, and it was kind of a shared space, but my ego was, my name is on this lease, so it's my space, and I had put myself in the role of I'm in charge of all of this stuff. And I think that was the thing, is like, sometimes we put ourselves into roles or that aren't true to an organization, and in doing that, it was all ego led. So the conflicts were, don't you do that in my space, even though I had sublet it and it was in the agreements that they could all do that stuff. But I felt like my ego needed approval. You know, I needed to sign stuff off, and there was like fights over it, because I was actually going, how dare you do that without me? And I wasn't very well at the time, guys. You know, this is not the Nick that is present here today. This was a guy who was really scared, you know, who put a lot of, like I say, a lot of expectations about how I showed up at work to portray an image, you know, an image that I put on myself, because I thought that was the image that was needed to succeed, or to be seen to be successful. And so it was really about roles. Yeah, go ahead.
This is like a complete tangent, but somehow I'm going to say it anyway. If this was especially in Toronto or in Canada, like the idea about like signing a lease and having ownership when we're completely on stolen land, that is just not ours at all in general, just adds a whole other like layer to it. So there's conflict because this is my property, when it's actually not of especially our property as like white people. Anyway, I just think that's just what came up for me. For anyone, go on, Michelle.
For me, you've both touched on this. You said about systems and box ticking earlier, and Nick, the weight of the legal system that you know, we could argue, I mean, I'm sure the three of us could sit here for 3 hours and talk about what's illusion, what's not illusion, what's real, what's not real, what's truth and what isn't truth, you know, and some of these elements on actually gaining a perspective of what that weight is. That weight isn't there in front of you at that moment, but that in itself is a process for you through the business. It's how you heal through your business to address those things and to have the right support around you to know that this is coming up for me. I'm scared because I've just signed this lease and I'm terrified I'm going to be thrown in jail. You know, and there's these structures that I personally find really uncomfortable. And I've gone in and completely dismantled, as you both well know, completely dismantled operational structures because the behavior is detrimental and actually harmful. It's harmful to people's well-being on a day-to-day basis. You know, to not have freedom and autonomy and a voice and creativity, and just to be treated as a human, as a resource, a human resource. Humans aren't resources. People are assets to a business, and without the people, you have no business. Without the customers, which are also people, you have no business. Without your supply chain, you have no business. And the back end of that is all people. And having those really rigorous, crazy processes in place, which are box ticking, compliance, health and safety. I completely appreciate that these things are for a reason, but they get over engineered so that people don't take accountability. They behave in a way that is so against who they are. They then become the behavior at work. And I think that's where that compassion, that's where it's so harmful, because it seeps into every other area of your life. Because you spend more time at work than you do anywhere else, most people.
Right.
Sorry, that was a tangent. I just feel very passionate.
No, we both, I was going around
powerful.
stolen land. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
You needed to say that. That I think what you said was like full of just so much wisdom in terms of like, first of all, the business wouldn't exist without the people, whether they're the employees or the people you're trying to get business from. You need them. So how do we bring in respect and appreciation and make it kind of reciprocal? Is that the word? Rather than like, I'm taking this from you and you're giving me this without you really thinking you're giving or knowing you're giving me. So it becomes this take rather than like an exchange. And I think that's where the difference can be, if we see it as any kind of relationship as an exchange rather than I need this from you, so I'm going to do whatever I can to take it.
Yes.
So I can have the private jet and you can make minimum wage, but that's okay because I need the private jet, right?
What you came to me, Michelle, is that we you know, a lot of the corporations that are set up today were set up in the 90s, you know, and they were set up with these kind of old ideals of, like, as you said, like compartments, structure, order, and you fit into this space, and it doesn't give space for the person to be able to be seen and to be able to be heard. And I think so for what I'm getting through this is that for us to be able to express compassion in the workplace has to be able to facilitate compassion. And how can it if it's set in these old kind of masculine patriarchal ideals?
If I can just add on to that as well, that it's 100% in line, and I agree with you on that. And if you have a system or a process that says, once you're done with something, you push it onto somebody else and you don't care how you give it to them. It's like saying, I need to give you this bottle, but I don't have to say what quality I need to give it. I could give it to you empty. I could give it to you cracked. I could give it to you with paint all over it or scribbles, or I could give it, as long as I give you this bottle, it's not my responsibility anymore.
Right.
And while we have that disconnection, instead of saying, okay, here's the bottle, is this what you need? Do you need any more information from the rest of the whole process to do your job properly? That's the complete disconnect. And that happens on every task. If that's how the operational structures run, it is completely disconnected. How are you supposed to encourage people to support each other when they're not encouraged? They are specifically encouraged to not support each other.
I feel like I just want Michelle to keep going because you're full of passion and like conviction today. So we found, like, I mean, I know this is your sweet spot. They were like, go do what you gotta do.
It is, because I went into a company. I've been very lucky with my roles, actually. I've been very lucky with mentors and leaders, and I've had some amazing experiences but I've also witnessed some really horrendous like situations with my friends. And you know, I'd be like, oh my God, work is amazing, and I'd be really like in my bubble and in my energy. And my friends would be like, oh, work's awful, I can't wait till Friday. And I remember being so, in my naive early 20s, being so confused. I was like, but why are people mean? Like, what? This
Right.
makes no sense. Why do people do this? And you know, the basis is just to be kind. What's kind? What makes sense? What's kind? What's direct for the business and for the people? The business still needs to run. You can't have people that are like, I'm not doing any work today. You can't have that as a business. You need, you know, and one of the things that was really good in a place that I was at, a startup, was self-care days. So if you felt you were on the way to burnout, flag it. Like, don't red flag it, like amber flag it before you get there. Just say, I'm maxed out. This has happened, this has happened, this has happened. I'm going to backtrack in a second, but just amber flag it and say, I need some, and that could be finish work at 2 o'clock on Friday. Okay, this is our workload this week, because if you plan properly and you know what you're doing, you know where your gap is. If you don't plan and you're disorganized and you always have deadlines at the last minute, you are never going to be able to facilitate space like that in your workplace.
I have a question. You're going to mute yourself, so I'm glad I have a question.
Sorry.
Can I ask you a question? Well, I'm going to, because you're drinking, and it's going to be awkward if I don't. Now, so because the question I ask with the people I'm supporting now in certain office or corporations is like, who needs to be doing their job so that you can be doing your job? Like, and I think that's like a really specific and important question to ask. So what you were saying, Michelle, makes a lot of sense, of like, don't flag the day or don't red flag it. Like, if you know you're burning out, then you have to put things into place. But how is someone meant to put things into place if they're not feeling a lot of trust or support from the person who they have to tell that they need a break? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen this done through somebody having so much conviction that it's the right thing for them to do, and they feel that it's so they feel so strongly about it being okay that they've been able to do that, and to work, because it's been like, hold on a minute, I've done all my work, this is what I need to do, this person's got this and this from me, the deadline's next week, I've got this scheduled for Monday, I just need half the day to sort some personal stuff out. And if you go to somebody with that kind of organization, structure, maturity, whatever you might call it, you can manage up in that sense. And the reason I think the stat is 50% of people are looking for other opportunities. 50%. You know, if you're a manager or you're a leader, look at half your workforce. Half of your workforce are open or looking for another opportunity, and that is exactly why, because people are faced with those blocks, and people will leave. They will leave because it's too restrictive and it's unkind, and nobody, that person who's doing that wouldn't want that being done. And that person is based in deep fear of not performing, not doing something. Yeah. And you have to, on an organization, it's not just top down or bottom up, it's the whole, it's 3D, it's all these different angles that come in, and it needs leaders, CEOs, managers to recognize that.
I think that's what you say. I think that's it. I think that if half of the people who work for you are looking for other opportunities and they leave, then you think just replace them, rather than, oh dear, we have to look at our operations and our systems. You know, let's just get, or they're just like, let's get another person, which costs them 6 to 9 months of that salary to get somebody. You know, so this is costing businesses, instead of them just reflecting and going, hey, what are we doing in our organization that was set up 20 years ago with these beliefs and this structure that isn't working today? And I think that is a question that companies should be addressing, especially in today's work climates, is to how do we just address our operations? We're heading into 20 minutes into this conversation, so I'm just conscious of time. I would like to, I know we said that we were going to end off on giving people some ideas on how to practice compassion in the workplace. I'm going to start off with one of the things that I would do, is that I think about when I go into work, I think about myself as a comet. You know, I'm this ball of light streaking through the sky, but I also think about everybody else as a comet. And then well, I know you're gonna be rude about this, Melissa, but the other thing, part of a comet, is its tail, right? And the tail is all of the stuff that's been coming off of me, my fears, my judgment, my expectations, you know, how I'm looking at other people. So I'm coming into something with all of this stuff that I'm expecting or I'm going to ignore for other people to recognize, right? And it could be something like I had a relative pass away, or I've had something, or there's been a breakup, or I had a fight with my partner the night before, and I'm bringing that into me, and it's going to affect me and the people around me. And I just think that everybody, if you have two people that work in an organization, you've got all of this other stuff and baggage that's coming into the organization. So, a tip is to be aware, that you have your fears that you're bringing into work, but so do other people. And I think it's about having a level of understanding of who we are and the stuff that we carry into our workplace, but also other people have different perceptions of what you're going through, and they're not going to understand. And you're going to have different perceptions of what they're going through. So it's really about being able to be honest and open about how we're feeling and what we're bringing into the workplace, because it changes every day. So just be aware.
Yeah. I
That's
think
mine.
I think as well, like, to, there, you mentioned, somebody, if you've had a death in the family, or if you've had, there's a different scale of what people might be affected by, and what you might be affected by greatly or in a small way. Somebody else isn't necessarily going to react in the same way. Somebody will react in different ways to different things. So you can't scale it. There's no scale. People have different, and you don't always know what's going on in someone's life, and you should never assume or judge any of that stuff, because you don't know. If somebody says to you, I just need some time, or they look, probably more that they look like they're struggling, they need support and they need help.
Who's next?
Oh, I can give you my so I've anybody watching, if, like, obviously I'm very passionate about this subject, and if you've got any questions or you've got anything specific on your business, just drop it in the chat, and I'm more than happy to give you a couple of pointers on those things, because there's so many, like, tiny little tweaks you can make to really start seeing improvements within a couple of weeks, like actually max within a couple of weeks. But one of the things I wanted to share is about one-on-ones. So when you're with your, as a leader or as a manager, when you have one-on-one time, instead of having that one-on-one time, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour a week, whatever it is that you do, instead of having that time as, okay, so these are the numbers, all of this, the data is great, tracking your data is great. Treating somebody as though all they are is a machine is not so great. So instead of having all of the business stuff, have one of those a month, perhaps, as okay, so where are you at? What are you struggling with? Is there anything that you want to talk about? Is there something that you want to learn that you're not learning here? Is there something that you feel we could be doing more? Is there something else you want to experience? And the tool that I've used before that's been quite successful for that is what I call 369. And it's 3 questions, write down 6 answers, and do it for 90 seconds. And it's what the person might want to experience, how they want to grow, or areas of life that they want to grow, and, oh my God, what's the other one? I've gone blank. Experience, growth, and learning. So it could be a language, it could be completely nothing to do with work, but you learn more about the person. And if there's someone that within the business, especially if you're in a big organization that speaks Spanish and you want to learn Spanish, you can connect them, even if it's just for lunch. You can start connecting people within the business, and it really is a really nice way to open up without somebody having to give you their whole life story, because they might not necessarily want to. So just one kind of tool for a one-on-one meeting. I
love that. Connection in the workplace. Melissa.
That's great, Michelle. I'm like, wait, I kind of want you to keep talking, because my tip will be, I think following your point, maybe both of your points, is when there's also meetings where it's more than one person, is to invite some space into the meeting to ask a question that is not just work related. So like having a check-in that is like gets us to know a little bit about the person in the room without having to disclose everything. So it can simply be ending the conversation with, what are you grateful for today? Or beginning the conversation with, what brought you joy in the last 24 hours, or what made you smile? Like very simple, just check in questions and check out reflections, just to have some sort of containment for the workspace. And that might not necessarily feel like compassionate in terms of its action, but what it does do is create a little bit of space to get to know that the person who is maybe the one hitting like lowest on the sales or high, I don't know the language, you know what I mean, is also a person who might have 2 kids, right? Or had a fight with their partner or lost a parent, and to get insight into that. So that's one, also a tip, I guess, in terms of getting that space within the meetings.
I love it.
Go on, Michelle. No?
Just on the back of that, if I can have just 30 seconds, Nick's about to cut me off. But on the back, that's such a beautiful idea, because I think we were talking, I said earlier about drip feeding all of the stuff that's really compressive. When you drip feed the nice stuff, people do, you know, just saying one thing in that meeting.
I want to add something. Also, if you are in a space where you interact with a lot of people, hopefully again in person soon, and if you ask somebody how they are, then really mean it. And if not, then don't ask, right? So if you ask somebody, hey, how's it going? Then be prepared to get an answer that might not make you feel super good. But also, if you're going to ask on purpose, not just because it's a social norm.
Beautiful. Michelle, some amazing insight. Melissa, I know you've like had a bit of a day with Mago and stuff like that, but you both have just shone like so brightly today with me, and I really appreciate the space with you guys today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry for
no, you guys, honestly, like I'm just blown away by you guys. You're awesome. So what's our next topic for next Wednesday? I don't know.
Next week we're talking about compassion, but more on a humanitarian level. So how we can have more compassion on the earth, just in the wonderful sort of surroundings that we have. How can we have more compassion for the earth?
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us, and thanks everybody who watched this. And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Yeah.